Today is April 17, 2023, and the location of the interview is located in Walla Walla, Washington. I am interviewing Mike Howell, a veteran leaving the service as a first lieutenant. And Mike, for the record, do you go by Mike or Michael?
Dixie, compared to some of the things I'm called, either one is fine.
All right. And to be perfectly clear, if you'll spell your last name.
Yes, Howell.
Perfect. All right. Dixie Ferguson and Dick Phillips, the videographer, are conducting the interview today. Mike, where were you born, in what year?
Ellensburg, Washington, 1942.
Okay, and the war and the branch of service you served in?
Vietnam, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
And again, the rank upon leaving the service was first lieutenant. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I went through the Reserve Officer Training Program at Washington State University.
Mm-hmm. And where were you living at the time? Was that at home or at school?
Well, mostly at home.
Yeah.
Born in Ellensburg, in the third grade we moved to Ritzville, Washington. Graduated from high school there, and then the family moved up to Oroville, Washington at the head of the Okanagan Valley, and that was home address while I went through school.
Excellent. Were you in a farm family?
No, my parents were both school teachers.
Okay. Aha, I see that. And so was the ROTC, was that mandatory in college?
It was when I matriculated in the fall of 1960. Since WSU was a land-grant college, the first 2 years of ROTC were mandatory.
Okay.
And so you could take either Air Force, which meant you had to really shine your shoes, or you could take Army and you had to march with a rifle.
Okay. What was that experience like in college?
Well, I enjoyed it. I didn't have any objection to the military per se, and part of the reason I joined the Army was because Air Force, the very best thing to do for a career is to be a pilot. And that I wouldn't have been able to do because I was wearing glasses at that time. And so I thought there might be a chance I could be an Army pilot, but if you're wearing glasses when you go in, they don't let you either. So,
Right.
which was probably fine because I'd have probably wound up flying choppers in Nam. And
That's right.
that wasn't the best duty to have.
I'm not sure any duty, but chopper pilot's not a good record.
No, Charlie hated choppers. He'd shoot at them real quick.
Right. When did you know that you were heading out for basic training?
I'll tell you,
or officer training, excuse me.
well, at the end of the sophomore year, then you had a choice. You could either discontinue or you could elect to go to advanced ROTC. And so I elected to go to advanced ROTC. And there, the closest thing we ever got to basic training was a 6-week summer camp through ROTC. So as far as basic training, which most people experience, I did not, because that wasn't the way they had it organized for the officer candidates.
And officer candidate school was where?
Well, it was all at WSU. I took the classes were at WSU, and we had drill there, and then the summer camp was at Fort Lewis. And so we went over there for 6 weeks and went through a variety of different training scenarios there, but most of the training happened on campus.
On campus. Are we talking 64, 65, about that time now?
Yeah. I graduated and was commissioned in January of '65.
Okay. You were hearing the rumblings about Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
Did you assume that that was your destination?
Well, it was a possibility. You know, Army makes decisions here, there, and elsewhere, and sometimes they're undependable. So, there was always that possibility, but there was also the possibility that they would need a lieutenant someplace else, and that's where I'd get sent. So initially, I had considered a regular Army commission. I was eligible for it as a distinguished military graduate. Turned it down initially, and then Lyndon and I thought, well, it might not be a bad career, and so reapplied. And on 5 different occasions, the same captain from the Office of Personnel Operations called me and said, what do you want to do, where do you want to go? Which was kind of unusual.
Yeah.
And so when I talked to him first in the Pentagon, he said, well, since you turned it down the first time, I'm sure it'll come through, but it'll be 4 to 6 months before it does. And that sounded just fine, because then I'd have a much better picture having experienced the real thing. And then, of course, they changed their mind again, and 4 weeks into the Engineer Officer Basic course, they called me in and said, your RA's here, do you want it or not? I figured if I turned it down a second time, I'd never have a chance. And regular Army commission, if you're going to make a career, is a significant advantage. And that removed me from the first assignment I had to come out as a duty assignment was to a construction battalion at Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Say that again. That was offered to you. You didn't have that choice. It was offered to you.
It was given to me.
Given to you.
There was no choice in that one. When I went on active duty, the first thing that happens is there's 3 months of Engineer Officer Basic course. That's at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And then from there, you go to your first duty posting. And that had been assigned, as soon as they had their hooks into me, they said, you're going to this outfit at Fort Knox. And it was a construction battalion. But when I accepted the reserve or the regular Army, you can either then become a pilot, which I couldn't do, or you can spend 3 weeks jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, or you can spend 9 weeks eating snakes in the swamp in Florida. And I was an engineer, and I knew 3 was a third of 9, so I elected to go jump out of perfectly good airplanes just to get to the ground before they did. But that caused me to not be able to deploy with the construction battalion that was going overseas. And that didn't exactly break my heart, although they went to Thailand and built a road, so that would have been a different experience than I finally got to do.
You did?
Yeah. And so then the same captain called me up and he said, okay, you're not going there, where do you want to go? And he started naming things off, and by that time when he said 4th Infantry, 4th Engineers at Fort Lewis, that sounded pretty good. And so Lyndon and I decided, yeah, let's take that one. And so after jump school, that's where we wound up, was at Fort Lewis.
And jump school was Fort Benning?
Yep.
And how many jumps?
I had the 5 qualifying jumps.
And did you like them?
It was interesting. Like and joyful and interesting are sometimes different things. It was the training was very rigorous. Going there, all those who had selected both airborne and ranger training were put into a special PT program at Engineer Officer Basic School. So we had additional PT to get us in shape. And so it was really, it's probably the best shape I'd ever been.
Okay.
By the time I got through that, and when I came out of airborne, it had torn me down because it's very, very rigorous. And but 2 weeks of doing things on the ground, and then they put you in the airplane. And when you're practicing the position to jump out of the airplane, they get you all set, and if you're not quite right, they adjust this, that, and the other thing. When they put you in the airplane, you step up, you're out the door, because you're conditioned that when somebody taps you on the butt, you do this. It's just
totally
a reflex.
Yeah.
And for 2 weeks, they tap you on your tail and you flinch. And when you were in the airplane, they never gave you a chance to get in position. When they touched you, you were out the door. You just jumped. That's it.
Did you get a peek out the door?
Very briefly,
Yeah.
very briefly. You shuffle up there, you're in a line, and it's all static line jumping, so that you don't have to pull any kind of a ripcord unless you need your reserve chute. But you get to the door, and the jump master then gives you the signal of when to exit. And you're shuffling up there, and you shuffle up and turn 90 degrees in the door, and you're gone. Just, that's all it
Do
takes.
you remember what that was like?
Yeah, it was wild. The jumping is not bad at all. When you first come out, you're in a 200-mile-an-hour slipstream. And so it swings you out this way, and then all of a sudden, you feel this tug on your shoulders when the chute opens. And then it's really quite pleasant. You're floating up there looking down at the ground, and by that time the airplane's gone. So it's very quiet and peaceful. It really is the stop at the bottom that can get you.
And how was that stop at the bottom?
It worked out very, very well. We had been trained in the parachute landing fall, and again, you practice it to the point that it's just a reflex action. And when the balls of your feet touch the ground, you go into a 5-point roll, and done properly, you wind up looking right straight at your parachute, and it just, you're up like that.
Okay, so you're on the ground. Who comes and gets you?
They're the tax sergeants. And actually, it's not entirely quiet coming down, because there are the NCOs on the ground with megaphones yelling up at you if things aren't quite right, and giving directions. But
After that, were you ready to go back? Well, you didn't have a choice, but you were ready to go back again for another jump.
oh yeah, and you get that far, you just will get the wings. It would be a real nasty thing to wash out and have to go back through and start over again.
And in modern training and warfare, why do we have paratroopers?
Well, there were a couple of jumps in Nam, I think, and there are times when dropping people in can get them to a place they couldn't get to on the ground.
Right. So it's still practical.
Same type of thing that happened in World War II, that you wind up coming in and dropping behind the lines, and then you've got them pinched between the two. And so part of it is just having that capability available.
Right.
Whether or not it gets used very much is something else again. And nowadays, most of the people who use that parachute in are Delta Force or SEALs or Sneaky Pete's of some type,
Right.
that are going in someplace where they want to arrive and have nobody know they're there.
After your 5 jumps, did you have any interest? You'd like to do more, or that was it?
No, that was enough. I wouldn't have been afraid to do it, but if you were going to do more jumps, you'd wind up with an airborne unit, 101st or 82nd or 173rd Brigade or something, and 4th Infantry was what's known as a leg outfit, because you did not jump with them.
Right. So you were getting some pretty decent training along the way.
Oh yeah, no, there was the initial training to become an officer and lead the troops and going through airborne was excellent. One of my favorite memories is in Engineer Officer Basic School. We had a command sergeant major come in, and he was wearing what then was considered dress blues. And of course, he's got the 3 chevrons and the 3 rockers and the wreath with a star in it. So there's gold all the way from elbow to shoulder. And then from wrist to elbow up one side, he had service hash marks. Wrist to elbow up the other side, he had re-enlistment hash marks.
Wow.
Fruit salad that ran up kind of over his shoulder.
He's called a lifer.
Oh, he and command sergeant majors tell generals who's cowboy to cabbage.
Yeah.
Those are people you really pay attention to. And he was also imposing just in size. He was a big fellow.
Yeah.
And he said, and he's looking out at this sea of brand new wet behind the ear, just barely got the polish on the bars, second and first lieutenants. I know he's thinking, holy mackerel, what's the Army come to? And he said, "Gentlemen, you may have heard that the non..."
And you're talking about, he's looking out at the sea.
Yeah, he's looking out at the sea of young lieutenants and said, "Gentlemen, you may have heard that the non-commissioned corps of the Army runs the Army. That, gentlemen, is true. Your job is to lead the Army."
Oh, interesting.
And there is a difference. And,
Interesting.
found out early on, you take care of your NCOs and your secretaries, and life's a whole lot better than it is if you try and mess around. You know.
I can imagine.
So, and I was fortunate. I had a lot of very competent non-commissioned officers with which I got to
Absolutely.
work.
That's gold to you.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to 4th Infantry, I'm sorry, where were you going with the 4th Infantry?
Okay, I was, as an engineer officer, was assigned to the 4th Engineer Battalion Combat 4th Infantry Division. And each division has a battalion. At that time, the organization has changed hugely. And I have absolutely no idea how 4th Engineers is organized now. It's much different than when I was there. But each division had a battalion of engineers. And in the battalion, you had a headquarters company, you had 4 line companies and a bridge company. And then the headquarters company stayed with battalion headquarters. And then first companies A, B, and C were assigned to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd brigades of the division. And company D was a floater, could be plugged in anywhere. And the bridge company carried all of the bridge.
What does that mean, the bridge? What does that mean?
Well, they built bridges across.
Literally bridges.
Yeah, literally bridges, all the way from, you've seen the little ones with the pontoon boats and foot bridges. And then we had what they called the bulk bridge, and it was kind of an erector set you put together. And then we had a heavier bridge above that, and 2 or 3 of the tank-mounted scissor bridges that they could run out and lay down for. And so they were always, were not assigned to a specific brigade ever. They were in reserve to be used by the division when it was necessary to get people across the water.
And I'm getting ahead a little bit, but did you fully know how important these were in a combat zone? Bridges, roads.
Yeah, you know, and yeah, my degree out of Washington State was agricultural engineering, and so being an engineer, and again, if you did well in the ROTC program,
I couldn't find it in your Apple Music library.
Be still. You don't need to find anything on that. If you became a distinguished military graduate, you had a choice of branch. And if you weren't that, then you were assigned to a branch. And so I chose the engineers and wanted to.
Yeah, I'm going to have you brag on yourself. Distinguished, what does that mean, Mike?
Well, when I went through WSU, one of the things that I enjoyed doing was marching in drill teams, and so I became part of the Crimson Rifle drill team and was with them for the 4.5 years. I was at WSU and went from being one of the marchers to commanding the drill team.
All right.
Was involved in the Cougar Rangers, which was a new unit that was founded while I was there. And
great.
Came out with the rank of lieutenant colonel and
wow.
One of the most highly decorated cadets that was there.
Wow.
So I did really well in the ROTC program. I didn't do quite so well on active duty because some of the officers I bucked, and that didn't get you a good efficiency report. But
Yeah.
so I came out earning the Distinguished Military Graduate. I was the Captain of Scabbard and Blade Honorary.
Oh gosh, that's
So,
huge.
Yeah, the ROTC career was
Wow.
interesting and fun, and I enjoyed it. But
do you have like shadow boxes of your awards and
Yeah.
ribbons and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
a big deal. Your parents had to be extremely proud of you, of course.
Well,
Of course.
you go in, you do, it's kind of like, oh, they're a hero. Well, no, you go do your job, and without any thought of becoming a hero,
Sure.
that means you got out on the pointy end of the spear and were running right at the very edge.
Yeah.
But you do what you need to do. And so when I was going through college, the idea was do the very best you can in whatever you're involved with. And so
And indeed. You did.
ROTC appealed, I was good at it,
Yeah.
had good results.
Very much so.
So I had the opportunity and chose to become a member of the Corps of Engineers.
If you'll explain that to me, Corps of Engineers is active duty in wartime,
Corps of Engineers active duty always.
all the time.
The Corps of Engineers was one of the first branches of the Army formally organized.
I'll be darned.
And they are unique in a variety of ways. There's also the Civilian Corps of Engineers, who have a military officer as the top two positions. We've got a lieutenant colonel and a major here in Walla Walla at our district office. But all of the rest of the people in there are civilians. Separating that whole civilian element out, then within the U.S. Army, and the Army's organized a little differently in that we have the different corps. You've got infantry and armor and signal and so on, and the engineers is one of the corps in the Army. And there are engineers involved in all of the services because a lot of them need things built, and so Army engineers are split in uniform, are split into two groups, construction engineers and combat engineers.
Now, this is true of Marines, Air Force, same thing.
Well, okay, the Marines wind up with the Navy Seabees,
Right,
construction battalions.
right,
As in construction battalion, CEB is where they often spell it with two SEEBE, but that ain't exactly where it came from. There are engineers, engineering departments in the Air Force. All of them have them because there is maintenance and construction that has to go on anytime you've got that large an organization.
Well, you explain it very well. Okay, so you're now with the 4th Infantry Division.
Yes.
And where are you before you go to Vietnam?
I went to Vietnam with them.
Okay, and where were they at Fort Lewis?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
When I went on active duty, I was assigned to Company D,
Right.
4th Engineer Battalion. My commander, when I got there, was a captain who was a helicopter pilot. And this was in June, July of '65. And even though he was a pilot, he was doing his branch duty. You have to come off flight status. He was an engineer officer. He was flying there. That was his primary duty. But every so often you have to come back and get experience in your branch. And so he was back doing his branch duty after his 3rd tour of Vietnam.
Wait, in '65?
Yes, ma'am.
Whoa.
Yeah. We were over there in the 50s.
Wow, that's
We had
interesting.
advisors
Yeah.
in the
Wow.
50s under Eisenhower. Anyway, so yeah. And so then I was in Company D for 8-9 months or so, and then was assigned to Company B, and that was when they had said, okay, we're going to send the 2nd Brigade over. In December of '65, I'd gotten a call from this same captain out of the Pentagon. And he said, "You're going to Nam?" And I said, "Do I have to?" "Yes." He said, "I'm afraid, Lieutenant." "Oh, goody. And we've got you going with the 173rd Airborne Brigade." Okay, I'd rather not, because they didn't have a real good reputation of survivability in that particular unit. And last jump, going through jump school, we got strapped in the parachutes, and when they strap you in, they send you down. You want things really tight. And we stayed that way for 6 hours before we jumped, because clouds were coming in and out. And when it was ready to load the plane, they wanted us to go. Well, it crushed the nerves across the top of both shoulders, and I had a scapula that would flare out, and I could touch the wall with the scapula and have that much 4 inches left of my backbone. So I ran out to the hospital and got a medical 3 profile and said, I'm legal, I'm legitimate, this is not, malingering in any way. But I hadn't lost any Viet Cong, I didn't want to go looking for it. Anyway, so that delayed that particular thing, and then he called up again and said, well, don't try getting another one because you're going this time. You want to go with, and he starts naming things off, and I said yes to a port construction company, which would have put me into the construction engineer side of it after having been in the combat engineer side of it, and being in a construction unit over there was pretty good duty because Charlie was looking at, and the NBA, they were looking long term. So they're saying, let them build it, we're going to inherit it.
Yeah.
So don't mess with them, they're building our stuff for us.
My gosh.
And 3 weeks after that, we got notification they were sending the 2nd Brigade of the 4th Infantry as a separate brigade. Company B's with the 2nd Brigade, and guess what, Howell, you're stuck in Company B, 4th Infantry.
Congratulations.
So here we are, getting ready to go, and at that time, they were saying that 2nd Brigade was going as a separate brigade. The rest of the division was staying back for whatever reason. And we were phenomenally under strength all the way through when I first got there.
Oh, Mike, I gotta stop right there.
Yeah.
How did you get over there? To Vietnam?
To Vietnam, flew in.
By
Air Force C-141.
C-141?
Yeah.
Where did you land?
We landed at New Pleiku Air Base and
Pleiku. Right into Pleiku.
yeah.
Just a few details. On your way over, was it a quiet flight? What were your thoughts?
Well, okay. My thoughts were the same as soon as I found out we were there and we were going, was I was scared spitless. You know, the whole idea of somebody sneaking through the bush with murder on his mind and you're the target is a little uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I became executive, I'd been a platoon leader in the engineer companies up to then. With Company B, I became the executive officer. And in that capacity, I became the training officer. And because we were going as a separate brigade, separate unit, they gave us a bridge company, or a bridge platoon to go with us, so we had that capability. So that meant our strength went up to about 200 people.
Was that a good thing?
Well, it was as far as going to war was, yes.
Sure.
But what it meant was I was responsible for training 200 people to go to war.
Yeah. So, plane full of your group heading to Pleiku.
Well, what it was, the company commander and the other top leaders flew in earlier. And then staying back, the 4 platoon leaders and I were to get all of the equipment on the ship. Because we're shipping bulldozers, dump trucks, jeeps.
I don't know how you figure all that out.
You know, well, it's an adventure, but that's, you know, again, you do what you gotta do. Here's the form, fill it out and say how much all this stuff
But
weighs.
the logistics of, you've not been there, the logistics of what do you need?
Yeah, and so we stayed back behind the advance party and then put all of the equipment on the ship, and 3rd Platoon and Bridge Platoon went on the ship to go over. Most of headquarters, or part of headquarters platoon went in with the captain. And then I took the rest of headquarters platoon and 1st and 2nd Platoon. And we went over to Fort Lewis, or over to McCord, climbed on a C-141 Starlifter, lifted off and flew to Vietnam.
Okay, now let's see, are we still in 1965?
Yep. No, we're in July of 66.
66 at this point.
Yeah.
And things are getting hot and heavy.
Yeah, we were the leading edge, part of the leading edge of Lyndon's buildup.
So was what?
Lyndon's buildup.
Lyndon's?
Lyndon Johnson. When President Johnson decided to start sending troops in, we were among the first that he sent in.
Oh,
when they were sending the big units in.
Gotcha.
And,
the buildup.
Yeah.
How did you connect all those supplies, tanks and everything? They came into Dene?
I'm not sure which port they came into, but once they were offloaded, they gave them a map and pointed them that way, and they drove everything up to Pleiku.
Gosh, because that's way on the other side.
Yeah, we were about halfway up the country and between the Central Highlands and the Cambodian border.
Pretty close to Cambodia.
Yeah, yeah.
What was Pleiku like when you got there? What did it look like?
Well, right, Pleiku, the town, was intact. There was very little war damage or anything there. We would go in and have buffalo steaks in the restaurants. Life was pretty much going along as well as it can if you're in a war zone. And one of the unique things about, or one of the major differences between the experience of troops in World War II and what from Vietnam on has occurred is that in World War II there was a front line and a rear echelon. And oftentimes units would be sent to the front line, they would fight, and then they would be brought back into the rear and a different unit would be set up. There are no front lines now. Everything is the front line.
And they all look alike.
Yeah, you know, it's an indigenous enemy. And I had no doubt that the VC washed my undies in the daytime and shot at us at night. You don't know. And the same thing is true in the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. You know, everybody looks the same, and you don't know when the guy in the blue uniform that's supposed to be your friend, the way they dressed him in Afghanistan, turns around and starts shooting people in green uniforms.
Exactly.
So, you know, that was the difference. But
disconcerting.
as far as the war coming into town, it very seldom did. We had New Pleiku Air Force Base that they put in there. And then close to that was Camp Holloway, which was an Army airfield, primarily for helicopters. And while I was over there, that's when the military had decided that the Air Force should wind up with all the fixed-wing aircraft, and the Army would keep almost all the helicopters. And so, but being transported around the country, I had flown into Camp Holloway on fixed-wing aircraft that were Army piloted.
Okay, the first few days of your arrival, what were your first impressions of it?
Well, the first impression was we climbed off the airplane and they put us and our duffel bags into the 2.5 ton troop carrying trucks, and we looked around and we just arrived in a war zone and we didn't see a weapon anywhere. They hadn't given us anything to put in our rifles.
Oh my gosh.
And we're thinking, holy, what, you know, well, we had no worthwhile orientation going over whatsoever.
Unbelievable.
It was just nothing. I don't know whether the powers that be didn't know or they just didn't care, but we had no acclimation, nothing. And so the first thing was, geez, what is going on? We're in a war
you're
zone.
kind of in charge of this.
Yeah, and some of us, I hope there's a statute of limitations on this, but some of us had thought that we went in with M14s. I was there it was over a year before our engineer unit got M16s. And I knew I was rear detachment commander, and the M14's got a wonderful bayonet lug on it, and when you walk into a tent there are wires to close the door and you hang yourself every third time you go in, hooking the wire on that bayonet stuff. On the other hand, I really didn't want to be without a weapon, and so went into downtown Tacoma and went over with a pistol. You
got your own pistol?
I got my own pistol, and that was illegal, but I really didn't much give it whether it was illegal or not. I'd keep it hidden. And so, and I know some of the other non-coms had done the same thing, and so when we were starting to drive off, when we first got there, they billeted us with the 25th Infantry Division, which was already there. And so
in the Pleiku area?
In the Pleiku area. And so we were being trucked down to that, and we went digging through the duffel bags and pulled our pistols out. Didn't need them. There was no reason to do it. There was nothing going on there that was of any particular danger, but we had no idea.
No, you didn't.
And as I say, going to war unsettled me dramatically. And I
That
think,
is shocking to me, taking your own pistol to a war zone.
oh yeah,
Go ahead.
no, again, as executive officer, I was primarily rear detachment commander. I spent most of my time in the base camp. And the captain went out, as company commander, went out in the boonies with the troops. And so my job was to make sure that when they got back, we were ready for them to have showers and good meals,
Big time, yeah.
all that sort of stuff. And so, it's kind of strange to be wandering around inside this 15,000 person city and carrying your rifle all the time. It's silly thing's heavy, and as I say, you get hung up on
Yeah.
the tent ropes, but I could put the pistol under my blouse, and then if something went whomp whomp in the night, I had something
Yeah.
to throw at them other than some dirt or sand or something.
Gosh, what were your living conditions like? Yeah.
Well, the reason the family doesn't get me to go camping very often is I got to do that for 6 months straight. We were in, the whole time I was there, our engineer unit were in what were known as GP medium tents. Our job, a good share of it, was building temporary wooden barracks for all the rest of the
general
division.
purpose tent?
Beg pardon?
GP's general purpose tent?
Yeah, all-purpose tent. It was, well, dimensions would probably be 20 feet wide and 50 feet long or thereabouts. And so the only permanent building we really had of any type was the mess hall. And when they got to build that, but we were building for everybody else.
Yeah.
But, it was cold and rainy. It was a heavy red clay soil. The weather was similar to what we had at Fort Lewis. We slept in sleeping bags most of the time. It wasn't the hot, steaming, humid jungle that was down south or in other places.
Was it a huge base camp?
Well, yeah, it was 15,000 people. It'd probably be close to the size of Fort Lewis.
Wow, that's big.
It's 15,000 people in a division, and so it was. And the training that we were to train ourselves, and so, conventional warfare, we went out on maneuvers at Fort Lewis and went into the woods and hid, and then had the reconnaissance planes fly over to see whether they could see us or not. When we got to Vietnam, we set up in the biggest cow pasture I'd ever seen. There's no way you wanted to be hiding in the jungle.
Yeah.
You wanted to be way out in the open, where you could see the grass wiggle and start checking out what it was. Because very effective warriors on the other side,
Yep.
and they'd take a little bag of rice and spend a week and a half crawling up to get in your back pocket.
That's something.
And if you're in the jungle, they're in their back pocket before you know it. If you're out in the cow pasture, you got a better chance of spotting them.
So, what were you building over there?
Our primary thing when we first got there were outhouses.
I believe that.
When we went in, we were the only mess hall in the advanced party for the brigade. So I guess they figured if we were putting it in them, we ought to have some way to take it out of them. And so we got to building outhouses, and one of the fun stories out of that was I think I had the first, if not one of the first flying outhouses in Vietnam. And that came about when we were to build an outhouse for brigade headquarters, and it was to be a 3-holer. And all of us said brigade would need a 3-holer. And at that time it had been raining, and going down the brigade street, we were being resupplied in some cases by what they called Goers, and they had about 6-foot diameter tires on them, and then looked like an earth mover. Goers, G-O-E-R-S, and I don't remember what that's the acronym for, but they were looked kind of like an earth mover, and they'd fill them full of supplies and bring them in. And they would take a run and slide on their belly pan to get down to the brigade supply area because the ruts were so deep. So I've got this 3-hole outhouse, and I'm supposed to get it from here down there to brigade. Well, I didn't really want to kill 2 or 3 troops hauling it down through those 6-foot deep ruts. So I looked down, and the brigade commander had a helicopter, had a Huey at his disposal. It was sitting there doing nothing, so I went down and got our operations officer to call down and see if it was available, and it was. And so we told him to come on up. We wanted to fly this thing down there. And so very experienced pilot, and Warrant 4, he'd been there a long time, done a lot of things, and he came over, he says, "What's that outhouse weigh, Lieutenant?" And, "Oh, yes, about that much." I don't know how much it weighed, so, "Okay, we'll try it." So my NCOs rigged it, and he came up and hooked on and went to beating the whale out of the air, and wasn't moving, and we're thinking, "Oh, geez, we got to carry it." And he unhooked and came over here and hovered, and out came his 2 door gunners. Back up he came and hooked it back up, and that time it lifted off.
It really flying through the air.
It was flying through the air, and I figured he'd lift it up and kind of take it out over the street and take, no. He took it up about 1,000, 1,500 feet and made this great, huge, wide circle. He's going out over Vietnamese resettlement village. If that thing had come apart, I'd still be in Leavenworth.
Any pictures of that?
No, I don't have any pictures.
Too bad.
But the other thing that then happened, they were having commanders call in the brigade tent, and I went running down to the S3 office and said, "Call down to brigade and tell them to get somebody out. Their outhouse is on the way in. They're flying it in right now." And all of a sudden, the chatter on the other end of the tent just stopped. And then you could hear this rush to get out. I know my captain was just going, "Geez, what did I do to get this lieutenant?" You know what? But we flew it in.
I'll tell you what, the pilot was probably patting himself on
Yeah.
the back of the, that's a new one.
That pilot did another one. The colonel says, and the warrant officer 4, there is a warrant officer 5, but 4s are right at the top of the heap. Those are very experienced, very wise, very competent people. And the colonel says, "Hey, Chief, I want to go out and I want to recon this road. And I want to get a really good look at it. So I want you right down there close to the road, and I don't want to be going too fast." Well, the colonel may be assigned the helicopter, but the helicopter belongs to the pilot. The chief says, "Colonel, you are now in Vietnam, and we fly one of 2 ways, high and fast or low and fast. You won't be high or low, Colonel. Low and slow was not something they did." So Colonel got his first lesson in Vietnam too. We're not going low and slow.
Oh, that's good.
And so,
was that, I mean, seriously, were there a lot of outhouses that you had to build?
well, okay, you've got 15,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, in the brigade, let me see if I can remember. You've got 4 or 5, or maybe more, infantry companies. You've got armor. You've got signal.
Wow.
You know, you have all of these people. And so there's about 3,500 people in a brigade.
Wow.
And probably 12 or 15 different units. And so for our engineer company, we had, I think, 1 2-holer, maybe 2. But yeah, there was a fairly large quantity of outhouses to build.
Now, Mike, before you went over, did you have any idea this would be part of your assignment?
No. No. The only thing, like I said, we went out hid in the bushes for our training. Well, that was totally bass-ackwards, you know, and so we had no guidance whatsoever. All I knew was that people went to Vietnam, and some of them got to come back home and live again, and others came home in a box they put a flag over. Yeah. And so I had 200 souls that I was supposed to take over there and theoretically keep alive.
Huge.
Yeah, and
Huge.
I think that's when the PTSI started, was accepting that responsibility.
And if you'll just spell out the acronym for that.
Okay, well, it was post-traumatic stress disorder. It was shell shock, it was battle fatigue, and the more syllables you put on it, the less emphasis it has. So, and then people began to say, no, we got to take the D off of that, because it's not really a disorder, it's the brain's natural function to protect people who are going through trauma. And the latest, and I understand there's some move to make it the official designation, is PTSI, for post-traumatic stress injury.
And that, I believe that's true.
Yeah, to me, that's the most accurate description I've heard of. And that comes primarily, in my case, from being on edge, never knowing what was going to happen, 24/7, 365, living there all the time. And I can remember just before I'd go to sleep, in that Never Land, just before you lose consciousness, my body was tense, ready to spin out of the bunk if something went whomp whomp in the night. And so everybody there was basically in the same situation. And then others had much more traumatic things happen.
Yeah, boy, that's a
And
good
seeing it,
description of that.
you know.
Were you would one of the first things to be built there would be the surgical or the field hospital?
No, we had first aid stations, but we didn't have a hospital per se as part of the division.
You did not?
No. We had a battalion surgeon, and so he would take care of the minors' things. I'm sure we had some kind of an aid station with physicians and nurses, but they're relatively small at that level. And if somebody's in really serious shape, they're triaged and put off into a standalone, much larger facility with more equipment.
Not where you were?
No.
You were mentioning the helicopters coming in at night. That told you that there was trouble. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily. That base camp sat there for somewhere between 9 and 12 months before anybody fired a shot at it.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. There were just a bunch of people there, and
But you were so close to the Cambodian border.
yeah, but there was a whole lot of jungle between us and the Cambodian border. We were, I don't know, 40, 50 miles away.
Okay.
And so most of the enemy was out to the west of us, some of it to the east, but we didn't go that direction a whole lot. And so if we were going to go looking, we had to get out of base camp and go out into the jungle and start looking around for where people were. And during the Christmas truce of 1966, which is, thought, oh, whiplash, wait a minute, we're shutting down for a while and then we'll start up again. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Charlie hit, or somebody hit Camp Holloway helicopter base 5 times during the truce and once immediately after, and never fired a shot at us. And part of the reason for that is that you've got this entire perimeter that's always manned by troops with guns, and so to take on a division, the North Vietnamese and Charlie had to have 3 to 1 odds before they could wear down a unit and overrun them.
That makes sense.
And so that would mean they'd have had to have committed 3 to 4 divisions to go after the base camp.
So the helicopter carrying the troops would be a more logical.
Yeah, they hated helicopters because, again, you'd get into a firefight, and about the time the enemy would wear down the troops, kill enough off or run out of ammunition, whatever, to have the 3 to 1 odds. In came the helicopters with reinforcements. Blew their odds, they had to run away again.
Yeah, interesting.
And so they hated helicopters.
Okay, and Mike, that was the first concept of air mobility, correct, in Vietnam? Helicopters?
I think pretty much, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of them in your base camp?
No, we were not an air mobile unit.
Okay.
So the helicopters there did some troop movement, but not a lot. And those helicopters would come out of an aviation battalion and come to wherever the troops were, pick them up, fly them there, go back to their base. The helicopters we had were primarily for observation,
Oh, observation.
the little bubble
Yeah.
helicopters.
Okay, getting back to your responsibility. Now, you're sending these combat engineers out, and outside of the outhouses, were they building airstrips, bridges? What else were they doing?
Primarily landing zones. And we did some bridging when necessary to get troops across here and there.
How long would it take you to do a bridge?
Depended on which type of bridge we were doing, but somewhere between an hour and 8 hours.
That's all?
Oh, yeah.
And did you always have your supplies
Yeah.
ready to go?
The bridges, bridge trucks are 8 feet wide and about 30 feet long. And they got the bridge inside the truck. And so you start pulling these pieces of bridge off and they lock together and you put them across the stream.
I'll be darned. And do you think any of those are still there today?
I doubt it.
No.
They may be, because I have no idea how many tons of equipment we left there. But there's no reason they couldn't be, because they're definitely
That's
durable enough.
Yeah.
You put up
And
a steel bridge.
Yeah. And my memory is that they were working way into the night with the overhead lights. Am I right?
It could be, yeah, it
Wouldn't that
depends
be
on.
dangerous out there? They didn't know where they were.
Oh, yeah, no, it was, the whole country was dangerous. But one thing that enemy, they had to be well organized before they could act. The U.S. military is known for its ability to tap dance and improvise. And with many of the enemies we fought over the years, if you could get rid of the officers, the battle was 3/4 won.
What
And
does
that goes-
that mean? Yeah,
Well,
what's
okay, we go clear back to the Revolutionary War. And one of the things that the British absolutely hated was that we didn't fight fair. The rebels were not fighting fair at all, because they would hide behind a tree and shoot the officers and the senior NCOs. And the German army was pretty much the same way, in that they did not want nor allow nor train the foot soldiers to take charge and innovate and do things. If one of our units in whichever war lost its officers, you had NCOs or you had some PFC who said, "Follow me," and away they went.
Interesting.
And so our troops would in fact were an effective fighting force, with or without officers. And some of the enlisted people think they were better fighting forces without officers in any case, but
This is kind of a sick joke, but Mike, did you always watch your back?
oh yeah, and that was, and again, when I was there, this was before the drugs got to be as bad a problem as it was. It was before the major demonstrations started occurring here. When I came home, I did not suffer the slings and arrows that guys did later, being spit on in uniform and this type of thing. The American Legion post wanted to hear what had happened and what I'd done over there. So it was early on, and but I can understand how some of these things would happen, because two of the platoon leaders we had in ours came out of officer candidate school, and so they had been drafted, and then they wanted lieutenants, so they said, okay, you get a college degree or this or that or the other thing. And they were greener than I was, and I was bad enough. It's at least I'd had the 4 years of ROTC and some of the theory and some of the practice in being in command. But
Well, not
if you got one of these gung-ho infantry lieutenants that came out and was in one of those that when the commander said frog, they jumped and asked how high on the way up. They would want to send experienced troops into the same area where they'd been ambushed a week before and would not listen to.
Yeah, and the academy graduates probably, on the tape, they were probably pretty green.
Oh, yeah. No, well, they were less green than OCS. OCS was the least, had the least experience and training. And there were some very, very good officers came out of OCS. I don't want to denigrate the officer candidate school at all, but it's kind of like the difference between the regular active duty Army and the reserves and National Guard. And I've been in all of those units, not National Guard, but the reserves are not as well trained as the active duty because these guys are there 7 days a week doing this. Here we got weekends and a summer camp. And so the capability may be the same, but the experience and training is different.
And while you were there, were you meeting a number of those who already had at least one tour there and are back again?
No, in our unit, when we went over, it was everybody's first time in country. Now, while I was there, I met some NCOs who had been there before in other units. But almost all of us going in at that time. And again, this was pretty early in going in the summer of '66.
How was the morale?
Oh, the morale was fine. You know, we and again, the engineers are kind of a unique branch. We are a combat arm, but you tend to work with people more than they work for you. And particularly infantry or armor, there is a significant split between officers and enlisted personnel. And part of that is necessary because if you know and like somebody and then you got to say, go get that machine gun, that can be very, very hard. And so if you're more dispassionate about it, it makes command easier. We generally don't have to tell people to do that, and so it's a more collegial relationship between the officers and the enlisted ranks.
Yeah.
My dad says, how do you work with your troops? And I said, well, we get together, figure out what we're going to do, and I ask them to go do it. He says, well, what if they do it when you ask them? I say, then I order them. You know, the power is there, but don't use it if you can help it.
That's a very civil.
Yeah.
And a hard question, but did you lose some of your men over there?
No.
Wow.
Not that I know of. Now, keep in mind, I went on active duty in March of 1965. I had 2 years of active duty commitment. That meant I was coming out in March of 1967. We went over in July, I think, of '66. So that meant I would spend 9 months at the maximum. And at that time, they couldn't keep me. They had to send me home. What in fact happened was I spent just over 6 months in country. I didn't complete a full tour. But when I left in January of '67, all 200 of my troops were alive.
That is remarkable.
But part of it is I scared the out of them when we were training. I came out one time,
wow.
We had a bunker at the entrance to the base camp and had a couple of troops out there who were manning the bunker on guard. And when I walked out to check on them, they were sitting up on top of the bunker with their fatigue jackets off. It was when you get a gorgeous day in the spring in Western Washington, you can't beat it. And it was one of those. And blue sky and warm sunshine and flowers in the meadow across the way, and they were sitting there catching a few rays, and 100 and some odd feet or so across that little pasture they were looking across was another row of trees. And so I explained to them that if there were somebody over there who didn't like them, even if they were a really crappy shot, they'd be dead. And that would be my responsibility, and so I wanted their, and I never quite had the facility that non-commissioned officers have developed to, and particularly drill instructors to a high degree. But I was able to impress on them that I wanted them inside that bunker and safe.
I could see where you get a little lax, nothing's happening.
Well, yeah,
Nice
we're out here, it's Fort Lewis and so on. Okay, fine. The other experience of that I ran into was when I was with the Timberwolf group here in Walla Walla in reserves, and we went over to do summer camp at Fort Lewis.
And Timberwolf are who?
The Timberwolf Division
Oh, okay.
here in I can't remember the numerical designation, but what we were stationed here in Walla Walla, working out of the Armory, was a basic training unit in reserve, so that if the balloon went up, and at that time Fort Lewis was primarily a basic training post, that if the balloon went up and the real soldiers took off to go fight, we would move in and take over the duties of that training company. And so we went over and took over the training duties as our summer camp, to spend 2 weeks working with actual troops. And we went out one night on the infiltration course, where you get down on your belly and you crawl under the barbed wire, and there is live machine gun fire going across the top. And the guns are locked, so they can't get down low enough to get anybody unless they stand up. And when they got through with that, there was a lieutenant who was debriefing them, and he was saying, I noticed some of you guys looked up and saw where the tracers were, and you weren't in there, and so you got up and just crawled through on your hands and knees. That's really good thinking. Well, I looked, and when you've been in combat, you'll wind up with patches on both sleeves. He did not. He'd never been there. So I
I
asked,
see what you're saying.
yeah, he'd never been in combat.
Yeah, I
And so I asked the first sergeant if I could speak to him. And again, explained in rather graphic language that there ain't no pre-front lines of fire. That if you do that over there, the least that can happen is you're going to have a chunk taken out of your hind end.
Yeah.
You know, that is not smart to do that. You better train the way you're going to do it. Or,
Yes.
and the kid in hand-to-hand combat says, but sir, I'm not a killer.
Oh, boy.
That didn't sit too well either.
He really did say that.
Yeah, he really did. He was, you know, just very lackadaisical, not really taking part in the hand-to-hand combat training at all. And I got on his case. Oh, but sir, but I'm not a killer. And I said, well, where you're going, they are. So, you know. Anyway, so.
Well, that's it. Well, Mike, getting back to, it's a very interesting thing about the PTSI. Was that something after you came home? It was a medical designation? How did that come about?
Had absolutely no clue that it was even going on. It wasn't talked about when I got out.
It was not.
No. And getting home was an adventure too. Now we're in January, and I know I'm going to get thrown out of country in March. I've got my port call, but I don't have any orders. Well, port call's fine, but you got to have orders to execute the port call. So I went down to the personnel sergeant and said, got a port call, no orders. What's going on? And he said, well, Lieutenant, go up and see Spec 5 so-and-so in division. So I grabbed a driver, and you got to understand that as an Army officer, I'm not competent to drive myself. I got to have a driver. Anyway, we go up there, and I go in division headquarters tent and find Spec 5 so-and-so. Yeah, Lieutenant, what do you want? I said, well, Sergeant so-and-so sent me up here to check with you because I got a port call but no orders, and he thought you might be able to explain that to me. Oh, well, clickety-clickety-click. Looked over here, clickety-clickety-click, and looked up and said, Lieutenant, can you be in the replacement depot at 5 o'clock tonight? This was about 10:30 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
And for once, I didn't smart off and say, is the Pope a Catholic? I just said, yes, specialist, I can. That night, I was in the replacement depot. The next morning, climbed on another C-141 Starlifter and called my wife the next day, since we crossed and said, I'm coming into Spokane at 5:30 tonight.
And that was that fast?
Yep. 2 days from in country to in the world.
Wow.
I was home before Lyndon knew it. Can you meet me in Spokane? Where are you? I'm in Oakland. What?
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. And You know, and again, it may have been me that I looked at the responsibility too hard. In being part of the Red Badge Project, I hear from some of our colleagues that were never in combat but were attacked and abused by officers and senior NCOs.
Would you go into that?
Well, Red Badge is a project that's been set up where we're asked to write about various different topics, some of which have to do with our experiences. And that's one of the ways that we're able to confront some of the demons with which we came home and come to grips with them and understand how and what and where. And so my thought always was that I had somebody say to me, it's kind of sacrilegious, but he said, okay, you're now a platoon leader. You got 30 people and you are their personal Jesus Christ. And that's kind of what it boiled down to in my mind anyway, that
that's huge.
I was responsible for it. And so, you know, we ask an awful lot of our 18 to 24-year-olds when they go into that. And
That's right.
so when I came home, it was in country, and went back, flew into Spokane, went to join up. Lyndon met me, and we had how old was David then? About 4-month-old son that had been born while I was over there.
Oh my.
And always had trouble figuring his birthday because he was born on the 4th and I found out about it on the 6th, which one of those dates is right. Anyway, and
My goodness.
away we went. You know, I wound up starting my civilian career.
You were through at that point.
Yep. Well, I had 3 years of active reserve duty.
Right.
But as far as any probability of being sent back to Vietnam, no, that was done with.
Wasn't that just, and I'm gonna let you continue on that, but wasn't that just a little bit surreal? It happened so fast?
Well, that was surreal, and also what was surreal, the other time I was real polite to somebody, was when the adjutant walked around the corner and said, Howell, you want to go on R&R in Hawaii? Well, I was so short, I wasn't supposed to get any R&R because I wouldn't be a full tour, but the guy who wanted, he got an extra slot, and the guy who wanted to give it to had just left 2 hours before to get the payroll out of Saigon. They couldn't call him back. Again, I said yes, very politely. And so, and my seatmate flying out on that one was our Blige platoon leader, and he and his wife and Lyndon and I had gotten to be good friends at Fort Lewis before we shipped out. And he succeeded me as executive officer of the company. Oh. And he was born and raised in Honolulu, and we were flying to Hawaii together on R&R.
Oh my gosh.
And so we took off in the fall just before Thanksgiving, flew into Hawaii, spent about 7 or 8 days, and went back to war.
Surreal.
You talk about whiplash, you know, excuse me, what?
Yeah.
This
Just
having a
like,
little trouble rationalizing some of this stuff together. But
would it almost be better that you didn't go on R&R? What do you think about that?
No, because I got to see my 6-month-old son.
Right.
And at that time, I was in a position that didn't exist. Since I was short and wouldn't be there for a full tour, our battalion commander stood about 5'4", lieutenant colonel, had taught at West Point, military history with a specialty in Napoleon. I never saw him with his hand inside his shirt, but it wouldn't have surprised me. An absolute martinet, no fun to be around. And he's looking and saying, okay, I got this guy, and they kept saying, Howell, if you extend, you'd go home a captain. And I kept saying my wife would rather have a live lieutenant than a dead captain, you know. When it's up, I'm gone. Well, we can't have him in a position of authority like an executive officer, so we'll make him the assistant S3 of engineerings and plans. That didn't exist. So I walked into a section where an E7 sergeant had been running it for well over 2 years. I had 2 3-man survey crews. 3 of the 6 surveyors had been commercial surveyors before they were drafted. And I had two draftsmen, one of whom had been a draftsman before he was drafted, pun intended, and the other one was a graduate architect. Now I'm in charge.
Kind of tough, isn't it?
You know, so I should run in there and say, okay, Sarge, now I'm in charge.
It's awkward.
I said, I tell you what, you keep me informed and I'll keep the brass off your tail. And other than that, you go do your job.
Very smart.
I'm gone. You know, I'd
Very
go down
smart.
at 8 o'clock in the morning, ship them out, find out what they were going to do, go back up and cut more music tapes in the tent, come back down at noon, check them in, have lunch, check them out, go back up, waste my afternoon.
That they loved
So-
you for that.
Yeah, so at this time, I'm doing nothing. I'm totally a waste of time. And my wife's going to have our first child, and I'm sitting in Vietnam doing nothing. So I went in to see our battalion executive officer, who was major, but had come up through the enlisted ranks. He'd Mustanged and gotten a battlefield commission. So he was a little older and wiser than many majors. And you want to be careful when you ask seasoned troopers a question. I said, Major Wiggins, you and I both know I'm not doing anything here, and Linda's going to have our baby, and why can't I get compassionate leave and go on home and be there? He said, Lieutenant, you got to be there for the laying of the keel, but you don't have to be there for the lunch and go back to work. So I went back to work, but then got out just, you know, on that thing. And then we kind of wondered why once or twice a week we'd wring my pillow out. After
Why?
I
I'm
woke.
sorry?
Wring my pillow out. Just take it
ring
and
the
wring
pillow.
it,
Ring,
because I would have night sweats. I have never had a significant flashback to Vietnam as a nightmare. But I've been surrounded for over 80 years by solid, constant, loving family. Been married to the same woman for nigh on to 59 years. 2 kids, 3 grandkids. And so for 80 years I've had this cocoon, if you will. And I was in.
Unknown caller.
I was in Vietnam for 6 months.
Mike?
And so there are 2 things I think about every day, my family and Vietnam,
Do you? Every day?
every day. The PTSI is there, and we didn't, I had it, didn't know it wasn't talked about, things were going on, and things really didn't start coming to a head until we went to Spokane to see the stage play of Miss Saigon. Now that's not a combat story, that's a love story. And I was in tears the entire first act and wasn't sure I could go back the second act. Because this young lieutenant falls in love with a prostitute. And one of my most vivid memories of Vietnam is sitting in a restaurant in beautiful downtown Pleiku, eating our water buffalo steaks, and out of the back room walked a young lady, tall for a Vietnamese, very attractive, very nice figure, wearing a form-fitting green sateen dress. And she did not want to be in that back room. And that's when I thought, okay, yeah, there'd been enough talk now that, yeah, maybe it'd be a good idea to visit with somebody about this. So I went out to the VA and I said,
That really hit home.
oh yeah, yeah, no, that came back in a rush, and there are 2 or 3 instances that come back in a rush on occasion. And went out to the VA, to the vet coordinator officer, said I'd like to get a screening for PTSD. They gave me this packet of papers, yay thick.
And how old were you at that time?
Oh boy, we were here, so I was in my mid-50s.
Okay.
Or maybe a little later. And it said, what was the event that caused your PTSD? It was not one event. It was a series of them. And so, you know, I forget it, just let it go. battle it myself. And then I went down to get Medicare supplement, and was insurance agent, was a retired Chief Master Sergeant out of the Air Force. He said, you should be getting your medications out of the VA, because even if you're fortunate and have too much money to fully qualify, the deductibles are next to nothing. So then I went out and said, I'd like to fill these. And they said, well, to do that, you have to see a VA doctor. Okay, how do I do that? And wound up with Eileen Bowe, nurse practitioner. And when I walked out of there, I had my medications. I had my appointment to be screened for PTSD. They did a full hepatitis blood screening. Thought I was going to need a transfusion by the time I took blood out. And I had my own blood pressure machine, and so for 15 years I'd had wonderful care out here. But they gave me a counselor, and Peggy is my angel. She taught me what was going on and how it worked and how to cope.
Was your wife aware of all this going on?
Well, she knew. She married one man in September of 1964, and she got a different one in January of 1967.
That's right.
And we were talking just the other night that, you know, my decision as a junior in college resulted in, and at that, we had gone together in high school, but at that time we were not an item. But my decision to take advanced ROTC started this whole thing rolling downhill. And so, you know, I owe her and the family an apology for making that decision, because it screwed things up.
But boy, Mike, that's looking through the rear view mirror.
Yeah, no, you know, here we are, and we've survived, and things have gotten along. But she was saying, yeah, there were a couple of times you scared me.
Don't you think that's a common story?
Oh yeah, it's and when I was working with Peggy, you know, and there is no cure. You learn how to live with it, how to cope, what the triggers are, what to avoid. You know, if I'm in a loud, noisy situation, it may not be threatening, but after a while, I'll begin to start twitching. And I am very fortunate. I have a relatively mild case. Some of my friends, you know, do need service dogs and are afraid to go around the corner in a grocery store and things that they saw and did that I didn't have to. But even so,
smells and sounds.
It's there. And
that's very powerful.
so not all the scars are visible. But
yes, you're so right.
I've had some professionals agree with me that it's my contention that if you have been in a combat situation, I don't care if you're civilian, recently, if you're a civilian or in uniform, it's not do you, it's how badly do you have PTSI.
I believe that. I really do.
Well,
thank you for sharing that for the tape, because it's very common. Interviewing a Korean War vet, he said, you never get over war, and no true words.
I have two friends where they're out of World War II, and their PSI popped out in their 80s. And and it when it comes to the surface, it's very, very forceful and wicked. It's just really wicked. And when I erupt, I can't stop it. And some of them, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and somebody's going to peel me off the ceiling. It's just strange what and where and how it triggers it. But yeah, that situational awareness. Beautiful sunny day on the west side of the state. Wonderful family vacation going on. The family's inside looking at the little aquarium in Port Angeles, Washington. I'm sitting outside. When I got to Vietnam, cigarettes were free, and I was nervous, and that was a bad combination. So at that time, I'd gone outside to have a smoke.
Right.
And 250 feet away is this kind of scruffy-looking guy riding his bicycle up and down. Just back and forth, riding it up and down. And I caught myself saying, okay, if he comes over here, what are my actions going to be? And then, wait a minute. He hasn't even looked at you. What is your brain doing? Stop it. let's go back and analyze where you are. And that's where the counseling comes in.
And
To
you
recognize
felt
that and be able to back
some
up.
sort of fear, threat from that.
Yeah, I was, how do I could envision him coming at me and how would I counter the threat?
Yeah.
There was no threat whatsoever. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very real and surreal.
yeah.
Yeah. Boy. But thank God for those that are trained to come alongside you. And did I hear you say this is something that you'll live with this until you go?
Oh, yeah. No, it doesn't go away. Like I say, I got 80 years in one life, I got 6 months in another life,
No, wow.
and they're both
Yeah.
present
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
And
Just
part of that's because I take a pill in the morning to take the edge off the PTSI.
and it really is effective.
Yes, it does. I wound up running out of it one time. And they said, well, you're going to need to see the psychiatrist before we can refill it. And I'd been out of the pill for about 3 days and got the appointment and walked up and he said, well, how do you feel today? I said, aggressive. Oh, he said, that's an interesting answer. Let's talk. And that was exactly it,
Interesting. But Mike, would you say, to summarize, so 6 months in charge of 200 combat troops, that's huge. And you said 24/7, that's huge.
Yeah, well, and
The impact on that.
yeah, and things that happened, they were firing artillery over the base camp one time and there was a short rounds and when artillery shells go out, they go boom. And when they come in, they go boom, boom. And all of a sudden there was a boom, boom. And so I'm into my flak jacket and helmet and looking out the back door and here are 2 of my signalmen leaning out the back end of the van in their t-shirts saying, gee, I wonder what that was. So again, I explained it to them.
Right.
We got those slit trenches. You get your stuff on and get in there now till we know for sure
Exactly.
that was just a short round and not something else that could be coming
Sure.
in. And
Well, did you have colleagues of your equal ranking to you that were over there with you? I guess my question is, when you came back home, did you have reunions? Did you stay in touch? Did you have these conversations
Nope.
with others? None at all. None at all.
I visited with Bill McCraw, who was bridge platoon leader and became my successor as executive officer of B Company. One time when we were at a convention in Honolulu and looked him up and we visited a little bit. Other than that, I've had no well, I shouldn't say that. Wes Ludwig was one of the platoon leaders. Second
See, you
lieutenant.
remembered these names, which is so amazing.
Well, there's the list of the charter members and so on of Camp Swampy.
I'll be darned.
We formed Camp Swampy over there. Anyway, I went on, can't think of the name of it now, there's a website that's supposed to be able to connect people. I just put my name on there and Colonel Ludwig said, are you the Lieutenant Howell that slept together on the floor of the company area before we shipped out? And so evidently he stayed in and did real well. But other than that, I don't know where.
Would that be helpful if you had?
It'd be, you could make contact with them, but I don't know that we'd have a lot in common, other than that shared experience of
Exactly.
being over there.
Did you say you did go to reunions later on?
No, I've never known of a union being held.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I've never come across one.
Never one.
No.
Did you?
No, and see, again, were you World War II, Vic? No, you're Korea? Or no?
Vietnam era.
No, okay. World War II, when they went in for the duration. And they pretty much stayed in one unit all the time. And so there was a camaraderie that was built there. We went over for a year and came back. And if you went back, you'd go back to a different unit.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. that's
And
true.
so, there wasn't, while you were there was the connection that everybody else had everybody else's back. That's what soldiers do.
Right.
And so that connection was there, but once you came home, people went on, and again, after a while, you got to where you didn't really want to go to a reunion or anything because, hell, we lost the war.
That's right. That's right. And
we lost the next two as well.
That's right. That is correct, Mike.
But we got better at it because the first 20-year war we ran, we lost 58,000 names on the wall, and this time we only lost 2,800, 2%.
Still too many.
But yeah, well, and of course, one of the things I wrote for Red Badge was the Devil's Triumvirate of Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush. And how did we finally get Osama bin Laden? We sent the sneaky Pete's in and assassinated him. They were no way in hell going to get him firing cruise missiles offshore. We should have immediately sent 5 or 6 groups of sneaky Pete's into Afghanistan, nailed the sucker, and got the hell out. But that's history, and when will they ever learn? When will they ever? So what I think has to happen, and what I've worked at is, here it is, this is what it is now, and so let's make the very best of what you can.
You did mention Red Badge in coming toward the end of this. Can you tell us about what that's about?
Well, Red Badge is, again, it's an opportunity for people with like experiences to get together in a group they trust and be able to visit about some of the demons they're facing. I heard a NPR radio program a while back, and they were doing the same thing you are. They're getting oral histories. And that's very valuable because otherwise it's gone in the wind. And guy was saying, it's really kind of strange. He said, I was talking to these 2 fellas from World War II, and we were having a good conversation. They were telling me all about the stories, and one of the wives walked in with some tea and cookies or something, and they shut up and didn't say anything until after she left. It seemed kind of strange. I called, and they were also saying, you need to ask people to tell you their stories. You need to ask them. So I called in and I said, yes, you do need to ask them, but be a little careful. Because I, being born in 1942, came up right after the Second World War, and Daddy never talked about what he did in the war. And there's 3 reasons Daddy didn't talk about what he did. Daddy didn't want to remember what went on in the war. Daddy didn't want to inflict his family with what went on in the war. And if you haven't been there and got the t-shirt, not to say bad about anybody, you don't quite understand.
That's right. You're right.
And I say that's why old soldiers have reunions and get together and lie to each other, And that's what Red Badge is. These are people who've been in military service, not all of them in combat. But as a result of their military service, they've had their head twisted. And so they're working their way through traumas and trying to work their way out. And again, I'm so very fortunate that my parents had been teaching school for 20 plus years before I came along. And that's a whole nother story, but they knew what I was going to do 2 years before I did. I never had a chance. And so my experience growing up was very, very solid. I did not have any of the adverse childhood experiences that so many people do, and a number of the people within Red Badge. And we find the same thing. I'm involved with the Successful Transition Reentry STAR project, working with the kids coming out of prison.
Oh, are you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm a founding member of it.
Oh, God bless you.
And those ACEs can really, that puts a whole different map behind people that they're working with. And then you pile the trauma of military service, whether it's combat or abuse by seniors. And there are a lot of things to work through and work out and come to grips with. And one of the biggest ones, and I do this a lot with the star kids, but the same thing can be true of people that working through PTSI and looking back on what's going on and what's happened. Not necessarily a faith-based organization, but I have a faith, and the guy I believe in gave us 2 commandments. One was to love God, and the other was to love others as you love yourself. Right. Love others as you love yourself, but that love yourself kind of goes down this way. Right. And it's my contention that you're to love others as you love yourself, and until you love yourself, you cannot love others.
Good point.
And so forgiving ourselves is a huge thing to overcome.
Amen.
You know what? I did not personally shoot or kill anybody in Vietnam, but I facilitated the death of who knows how many. And the fact that we were there corrupted all sorts of things. Another particularly vivid memory is we had hired Vietnamese to fill sandbags for us, division-wide type thing. And our base camp, when we set up, was right on the northern border of the base camp, and all of a sudden, here's this 12-year-old kid wandering through our area. Shoo, kid, go back out there. That's where your parents and such are filling sandbags. Go, you don't belong in here. About 15 minutes later, I climbed in the Jeep to go into town. And as we're driving along, we came up along a man sitting alongside the road in a 3-piece suit and a fedora. This is the summer. And sitting next to him was the kid who'd been walking through our area. And as we drove up, the guy reached out with his foot and erased what was ever in the dust. That kid he had to get in there mapping out the base camp. You don't use children that, at least I was not taught to use children that way, you know, and those kinds of things, knowing that that's going on, moral injury, if you will. And then the guy who sat next to me in the airplane flying over had the base camp named after him. When we got there, it was Dragon Mountain Base Camp, because there was this little hill over there that they thought was a mountain. And it became Camp Enari because Mark was assistant S4 when I dealt with him, and that was a lot of coordination, getting supplies and stuff together to go over. And then we sat next to each other flying in, and then I think he was planning on being a career officer, was infantry, and moved out of the S4 office into being a platoon leader. Somebody shot his machine gunner and he took over the gun, and first sergeant came in and said, "Lieutenant Enari's KIA." Got to go back and see his name on the wall. But so then you run into the whole business of survivor guilt. Why him and not me, you know? And who knows? It's
so common.
There's no defense against pure dumb luck.
So common.
Who happens to be there? And so those are the things that roll through and we deal with and keep going.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff. And Mike coming home, trying to explain to people outside, it's just, you can't do it.
And I can, have a direct empathy with the folks who went to Afghanistan and Iraq, because the similarities between those two and Vietnam, indigenous enemy, faulty intelligence.
And it
we didn't have the sophistication of IEDs, and didn't call them that back then, but they were there. We'd been hauling rock all day, and I had 2 dump trucks happen to meet, and they pulled out to avoid each other. Fortunately, this one was loaded when it hit the anti-tank mine that Charlie had planted alongside the road. And if you're at all familiar with military 5-ton dump trucks, they're huge pieces of machinery. And all of the drive wheels will drive, including the front ones. So you got this whole differential and great big knuckles and stuff in there, and everything from the front bumper to the bed was gone. Nobody got hurt because it was loaded and it would slump. Been empty, we'd have probably lost somebody.
The unpredictability,
Yeah.
just, it's just,
Yeah.
God, just so
You're
unsettling.
always on edge and looking around. And,
So unsettling,
Yeah.
hypersensitive
yeah.
all the time now. But, right, well, you give such fabulous insights. By the way, is the red badge every year?
Well, Red Badge, we meet every 2 weeks by Zoom.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
And on July 6th, please spread among your friends, neighbors, and enemies, we will be at the Geese Powerhouse Theater.
On July 6th?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
July 6th.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
it is open to the public
Oh,
without
wonderful.
charge.
Good to know that.
We at the
I
Powerhouse
need to
are
remember
sponsoring that.
Yeah, hooray for that.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, you came home, you were married already, 2 kids?
Yeah.
2 kids?
When I came home, we
You
had
wanna
one,
name
we had another one
name
later.
names of your kids
David and Brian are our 2
and
sons.
grandkids?
Yeah, we've got, fortunately Hannah's out here. The other 2 are in Illinois, Sam and Ben. But
Uh-huh.
that's too far away, but that's where younger son got his job teaching school, so.
Right. And the names of your grandkids?
Hannah is the,
Uh-huh.
Hannah, Samuel, and Benjamin.
Excellent, excellent. And then you came home and got a civilian job. And for the rest of your career, you were...
Well, I had a long and varied career, had a hell of a time keeping a job, one of the 2. And, part of
Part of it.
Can't specifically nail it down, but I think part of the wanderlust that I got into was PTSI having an effect. First started out as an engineer with FMC Corporation's Canning Machinery Division, then went to a small corporation doing design and manufacturing engineering. From there came up and was the ag maintenance supervisor for Green Giant in Dayton when there was a Green Giant in Dayton.
Yeah.
And they sent us back to Le Sueur, Minnesota, and I was responsible for the 10 U.S. and 1 Canadian maintenance shops as staff advisor to them. And then sold wholesale Ford tractors for 2 years, went further into the Midwest to Appleton, Wisconsin, and had a tractor dealership there.
Oh.
And the Midwest has got wonderful people and beautiful country and terrible weather.
Yeah.
And family was out here and we knew the weather was better. So we came back to Walla Walla in 1978 and I was the division engineer for Rogers Walla Walla Canning. And then after that, I had a private practice in financial planning, earning the certified financial planner designation for 8 years, and finished up as the director of gift planning for Whitman.
What a resume.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Duck and run here and there,
No, that's...
Like I say, had an awful time keeping a job.
Yeah, but zigzag and all the learning that took place. Well, is there anything that you would like to add that I may have not asked you?
Not that
in
I
this
can think
interview?
of, it's a lot of memories come out of there, a lot of good associations. Being in the military was very beneficial to me from a social standpoint because growing up in Ritzville, it's a farming community of about 2,500. I think we had 1 black person in town. And getting into the military, learning that people are people, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. My favorite thing on the diversity, equity, racist thing now is a picture of 3 eggs, and one has a green shell, and one has a white shell, and one has a brown shell. And then a picture of a frying pan with 3 eggs in it.
Yeah.
You don't know which one came out of which shell.
Love it.
And so that was very broadening to be able to associate with a whole variety of different people.
No I can't think of anything else more melting pot than the military.
Yeah. It still has its problems with racism and discrimination today, but part of that is the fact that that's been going on ever since people were around.
That's
And
right.
somebody always wants to have some group that isn't quite as good as they are.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're so right.
But Battalion chaplain was very black man and wonderful person. He could take a bunch of GIs in chaplain's time. Oh, that sounds like fun. And in 15 minutes, they were right in the palm of his hand. He was just.
Really
And somebody said, well, who is the battalion chaplain to me? And I said, well, he's that great big dark complected fellow you see. Dark complected sure as hell was, you know. That's what came out instead of colored or anything. But,
well, I think in different ways you've answered this question, but how your service and experiences affected your life. I think you've answered it, but if you want to
well, it's
answer again.
it's an integral everyday part of it. And, you know, probably at the end of the day, the sum result has been positive. But the effect it had on the family that in many cases we weren't aware of early enough was detrimental. And it continues to be part of it. Emotions can come to the surface very quickly given particular circumstances. And when we went into Iraq the second time, we would be watching national public television news, and once a week they would come on with the casualty things, and I'd get up and leave the room. And George Bush would come on the TV, and I'd get up and leave the room. And Ken Burns did a marvelous job with his Vietnam stories.
So you did
Yeah,
approve,
but we found out it was better to watch them in the afternoon than at night.
Yeah.
Made for a chance to wind down from some of it. But
well, all I can say, Mike, is you're a patriot. You served your country well. You've sacrificed. You've paid dues to war. And you know, I love that. Sorry. We are a grateful nation. And I'm so happy that more and more of you are wearing your caps, identifying yourself. We're just so long overdue.
well, and I think, you know, everywhere you go, particularly run out of the VA, you just kind of quit it, you know. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, but it's
and I think part of that is the collective guilt of how
I agree.
the people who went into the service and did what they were told were treated because they did what they were told.
That's exactly right.
And
That's exactly.
people had no idea what that would mean. And the guys who marched against the war, those who gave their medals back, I can empathize with them. I sympathize with them. You know, I could almost be right there with them because.
In hindsight.
Yeah, in hindsight, the people who went through World War II can take pride in the fact they defeated an evil enemy on both sides that had great conquest in mind, and they won.
That's right.
Our later wars, those people hadn't done anything to us directly. And the domino theory was a crock of baloney. And so, you know, it's harder to take satisfaction in having done that.
But as a young man, trusting in your government, believing in your cause, and honor duty to your country, and you served well, and you, from all the way.
The service is honorable. The causes may not have been, but the people who answered the call did an honorable thing, and we need to be very grateful and take very good care of them. You know, it's Congress needs to get off their duff and start giving a whole lot more money out there, here, there, and elsewhere, and getting things done. They say, well, we overwhelmed the VA system with these wars. Well, I go back to that knothead Rumsfeld who said, you go to war with the army you've got. Well, excuse me, you picked the day. Maybe you should have had the army you should have had when you went there. And battlefield medicine has gotten so much better that many, many of the young people who are coming home now would have been in a box out of Nam.
Yeah.
And so, the understanding is getting better, and that's good.
Well, you're speaking really words of wisdom. You really are, from experience and analyzing all of it and looking back on it. And, but we can't thank you enough for being here today to share.
My pleasure.
To share all of your experiences and your thoughts. I hope this will be an education rather for us watching your video.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Mike.
You're welcome.